Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. And we turn to page 138 for the full Kaddish. You can stand or sit however you're comfortable. Yitkala v'ikadash merava, ve'alma divrach yirtei, ve'amlich malchutei, v'chayichon v'yemechon u'chayi d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kariv v'yimeru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach, le'olam me'olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei, Itadar vitale vitalal shmei the kudesha brichu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata shchata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imeru. Amen. Titkabel tzoton uvotahon dechol Beit Yisrael kadam lohon divishmaya v'imeru. Amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru. Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imeru. Amen. Page 139 in Kamocha, and we move ourselves towards the Torah service and the opening of the Ark. If you're standing, you may be seated, at least for a paragraph or so. Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom, av harachamim, heitiva birtzoncha et Zion, tivne chomot Yerushalayim, ki vecha levad batachnu. Melech el Ram v'nisa, Adon olamim. And we rise for the opening of the Ark. Vayivinso Aharon vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu Ve'anusu misanecha mipanecha, ki mitzion teitei Torah, ki mitzion teitei Torah, udevar Adonai miYerushalayim. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Baruch Shenatan kedushato. And one paragraph down on page 140, open my heart to your Torah, answer my prayers and the prayers of all your people Israel for goodness, for life, and for peace. Amen. Kadisha Yakira Ana Emar Tushbechan Be'ana Rachetz Be'lishmei Kadisha Yakira Ana Emar Tushbechan Yehiravakadamach Detiftach libi bioraita Vetashli mishalin deliba dechol amach Yisrael Letavu chaim velishlam. Amen. Page 141.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Adonai Unerama
Shemo Yachdav, Lecha Adonai Hagedula v'Hagevura v'Hatiferet v'Hanetzach v'Hahod ki chol v'shamayim u'va'aretz. Lecha Adonai hamamlacha v'haminaseh lechol erosh romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishlachavu lehadam raglav kadoshu romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishlachavu lehar kodsho Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. You may be seated. Thank you, Barry and Yasher Koach. It's good to get that little break to reset myself for a minute. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's good to see you all. Good to be together on a beautiful, beautiful Saturday morning that feels a little bit more like perhaps September than the last day of July, but I think we'll take what we can get. This morning we're going to read Parshat Akev. And I was talking to Sharon briefly before services started this morning, and we were talking about the experience of being back reading from the actual Torah. And I was telling her because she understands this pretty uniquely along with me, that the Torah reading these weeks are actually really, really difficult, and that's because we're continuing on with Moses' recounting of everything that has happened in the other 4 books. And so while a lot of the first 4 books of the Torah have really similar grammatical structure, really similar style, really similar wording, the book of Deuteronomy is really unique in that we're getting all this first-person perspective. And so all this Hebrew conjugation of the first-person tense, I'm like completely unfamiliar with it after making my way through the other 4 books of the Torah, because it really is, it's so unique to hear. And so words that I like normally can kind of rely on how I know to pronounce, they're totally different. So that's both like a warning that if you hear me stumbling a little bit this morning, you know why, and to be patient with me. But also just kind of a re-emphasis on how unique everything we're reading in these weeks really is in terms of the context of the Torah and what exactly it means to us to be reading this a second time through, and what it means to us to be seeing these same events through the lens of Moses' own humanity. And whether you believe that it was dictated by God to Moses as like Moses' own interpretation, or whether Moses wrote it, or whether it was some other author, centuries later, that is actually, I think, very secondary. I think what we can get out of this is, what's the difference between living a historical event and recounting a historical event through someone else's eyes. And I think you'll notice, I'm going to encourage you to, as I always do, but especially this week, to follow along in the English if you're able, and to really see kind of where Moses' cracks show, I would say, where we don't see him necessarily being that super compassionate and loving leader, but where we really see him as someone who is essentially a lame duck leader, who can kind of say whatever he wants and say what's really on his heart on his mind, and how that lands with us, reading it today and reflecting both on him and on the ancient Israelites and their own actions. As I hinted at when we started services, what our portion this morning, what we'll read in the triennial cycle, really focuses on is what happened at Sinai. And so that includes Moses going up, Moses coming down, the receiving of the original tablets, the smashing of the tablets, Moses' witnessing of the golden calf. And so it's a roller coaster ride, and not just in terms of going up and coming down a mountain. It really is an emotional roller coaster ride. And getting the opportunity to see that through the perspective of Moses' eyes, I think really, really gives us a new perspective on the really deep ways in which he was personally hurt by Israel's actions. And from the perspective of leadership, how it feels when people don't listen to you. So yeah, I'll ask you to tune into that this morning. I'll try to pause at least once or twice. If people want to share their reflections on Moses' reflections, and for those of you who are with us over Zoom, you can put that into the chat, and I'll try to share that if you want to get your thoughts in as well. But otherwise, we begin this morning on page 1042 in the Chumashim, which is chapter 9, verse 4. And I will call Sharon and Barry up to help lead us through the Torah.
ויעזור ויגן ויושיע לכל החוסים בו ונאמר
אמן.
הכל הבו גודל אלוהינו תנו כבוד לתורה יעמוד Ya'amod Moshe ben Chaim Belville Levi Miriam Rishon Baruch Shenatan Torah L'Yamel Yisrael B'Kedushato.
Ve'atem havikim b'Adonai Elechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom. Right there.
Baruch Hu Adonai HaMvarach.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Al tomar bilvavcha Bahadof Adonai Elohecha otam milfanecha lemor. But betzidkati havieni Adonai lareshet et haaretz hazot uvirshat hagoyim haele Adonai morisham mipanecha lo betzidkatcha uviyosher levavecha atava lareshet et artzam ki virshat hagoyim haele Adonai Elohecha morisham mipanecha Ulaman hakim et hadavar asher nishba Adonai lavotecha l'Avraham l'Yitzchak u'Yaakov v'yadata ki lo b'tzidkatcha Adonai Elohecha noten lecha et haaretz hatova hazot lerishta ki am kshe oref ata Zechor al tishkach et asher yitzafta et Adonai Elohecha b'midbar lemin hayom asher yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim ad boachem ad hamakom hazeh mamrim hayitem im Adonai uvachorev hitzaftem et Adonai vayitanef Adonai bachem Lashmid etchem baloti hahara lakachat luchot avanim luchot habrit asher karat Adonai imachem v'ashev bahar 40 yom v'arba'im laila Lechem lo achalti umayim lo shatiti vayiten Adonai elai et shnei luchot avanim ketuvim ba'etzba Elohim va'aleihem kechol hadvarim asher diber Adonai imachem bahar mitoch ha'esh bayom hakahal.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher notan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. And just a couple examples of language here that really jumped out to me. We have Moses saying, Zechor al tishkach, remember, don't forget, right? There's like an intrinsic mistrust there of the people that they're actually paying attention. And also just this emphasis towards the beginning, right? He's telling the people, it's not because you've done anything good that this is happening to you. It's just that everyone else is a little bit worse, which not the most inspiring, that's not exactly the most inspiring goodbye speech. But again, I think we're really seeing his perspective after a tough 40 years of leadership.
Ya'amod Sheni, Ya'amod Ben Sheva,
Ben Moshe.
Ben Moshe,
Shena,
Shena,
Halevi.
Halevi, Sheni. We're on verse 11, page 1044.
Baruch Hu es Adonai HaMvarach.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'nasan lanu es Toraso. Baruch Atah Adonai nosen haTorah.
Amen. Amen. Vayihi miketz 40 yom v'arba'im laila Natan Adonai Eli et shnei luchot havanim luchot habrit vayomer Adonai Eli kum reid maher mizeh ki shichat amcha asher hotzeta mimitraim saru maher min haderech asher tzivitim asu lahem masecha Vayomer Adonai Eli lemor Ra'iti et ha'am hazeh v'hinei am kshe oref hu haref mimeni vashmidem v'amchet shmam mitachat hashamayim ve'eseh otcha legoy atzum v'rav mimenu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher nosan lanu Torah semes v'chayei oleinu nata b'sochenu Baruch atah Adonai nosen Torah.
Amen. And just to complicate these perspectives a little further, in verse 12, we have Moses saying in God's voice, God said to me, go down from this mountain because your nation, this is God saying to Moses, your nation has done something bad. They have gone off the path. And so it's almost like you imagine parents, when a child is misbehaving, it's see what your son did, not what our son did or what my son did. And so, yeah, we really just get these really muddled and difficult perspectives, again, of leadership. Keeps coming up.
Number 3.
Right there.
We're on verse 15 at the bottom of page 1044.
Baruch et Adonai HaMavarach.
Baruch Adonai haborach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMavarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Va'efen. Va'ered min hahar ve'ahar boer ba'ish. Ushnei luchot habrit al shtei yadai va'ere. V'hinei chatatem l'Adonai Elohechem, asitem lachem egel masecha. Sartem maher min haderech asher tziva Adonai etchem va'et pos bishnei haluchot ve'ashalchem me'al shtei yadai va'ashperem leinechem ve'tnapel lifnei Adonai karishona. 40 yom ו40 לילה, לחם לא אכלתי ומים לא שתיתי, על כל חטאותיכם אשר חטאתם, לעשות הרע בעיני אדוני להכעיסו, כי יגורתי מפני האף והחמה, אשר קצף אדוני עליכם, להשמיד אתכם. וישמע אדוני אלי גם בפעם ההיא, ובאחרון התענף אדוני מאוד להשמידו, ואתפלל גם בעד אהרון בעת ההיא, ואת חטאתיכם אשר עשיתם את העגל לקחתי, ואשרוף אותו באש, והכות אותו טחון היטב, עד אשר דק לעפר, ואשליך את עפרו אל הנחל היורד מן ההר.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
And number 4, Kahahod, on Sibura, Steve, Alpha, Eat. We're on verse 22, 10:45.
Baruch atah Baruchu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher bahar banu mikol hamim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Amen. Uvetavera, uvemasa, uvekivrot hate'ava, maktifim hayitem et Adonai, uvishloach Adonai etchem. Mikadesh barnea lemor, alu urshu et haaretz, asher natati lachem, v'tameru et pi Adonai Elohechem, velo hemantem lo, velo shamatem bekolo. Mamrim hayitem im Adonai, miyom dati etchem, v'etnapel lifnei Adonai et arbaim hayom, v'et arbaim halayla, asher hitnapalti. Ki amar Adonai lehashmid etchem va'etpalel Adonai va'omar Adonai Elohim al tishachet amcha v'nachalatecha asher pedita begodlecha asher hotzeta mimitzrayim biyad chazaka zechor le'avdecha l'Avraham li'Yitzchak u'Yaakov al tefen el koshiam hazeh ve'el rishao ve'el chatato pein yomru haaretz asher hotzetanu misham mibli yecholet Adonai lahaviam el haaretz asher diber lahem umisinato otam Hotziam lahamitam bamidbar, v'heimamcha v'nachalatecha, asher hotzeta b'chochacha hagadol, uvizroacha hanetuya.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. So I want to highlight one more verse, and then I want to open it up to see if anyone else is thinking about this. There's one particularly, I think, difficult verse in what I just read, which is chapter 9, verse 24. Mamrim hayitem im Adonai miyom da'ati etchem. This is Moses saying, as long as I have known you, you have been defiant towards Adonai. So again, we keep seeing this kind of, this is pretty unrelenting on his part in terms of how far he's really bringing them down. And I wonder, I've spoken a lot about this already at this point this morning. I'm wondering if anyone else reading through the text has any reflections on, even on what they think is going on for Moses as he's doing all this, saying all this. Yeah, Gene, please. Yeah, so Gene put two comments in there. The first was just discussing the difference between being defiant towards God and wrestling with God, which of course wrestling with God I think is something that really resonates for us as Jews, and having kind of the ability and even the permission to do that, and not having that always be viewed as defiance. And so do you think they crossed the line, Gene, or you think they didn't know the line, or you think Moses didn't know the line? All right, so Gene's not giving anyone a full pass either. Gene's saying that the people crossed the line many times. But the other thing that Gene's highlighting, which is a really interesting aspect in this reading as well, and I think I even, since I count on you, Gene and Sharon, being on the same page, I think I heard Sharon make a little noise when we read about Aaron, because there is a pretty strong indictment of Aaron in this passage as well. What verse is it, just so I can highlight it? Here we go. Yeah, verse 20. Moreover, the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him, so I also interceded for Aaron at that time. Which in some ways, yeah, does anyone have a comment or make anything of that? Before I give my take on it? Yeah, Bonnie. Take Moses' word for it that God was angry at Aaron? Yeah. Yeah, so Bonnie's saying that maybe we take the word of this text in Deuteronomy for what actually happened back in Exodus. And then, I would actually give I think that is actually a good starting point. One of the remarkable things about the account of the golden calf in the book of Exodus is that Aaron gets almost a complete pass. While Moses was up on the mountain, Aaron was in charge for all intents and purposes. And the text in Exodus is pretty clear that Aaron was kind of the ringleader of everything that was going on with regards to the golden calf, and he really does get a pass in Exodus. And the rabbis twist themselves into circles both to try and exonerate Aaron because they like Aaron, but also to try to figure out, well, why did God give him this pass? And what Moses is saying is that, actually, there was no pass. That was all me. Which isn't, and that brings us to a point that Bruce put into the chat, that Moses was God's chief proponent on earth. From the start, Moses had the task of convincing the Israelites to follow God's directions, and really was always met with resistance. And I'm going to insert here, that might have included his own beloved brother. However, they always in one way or another followed Moses and God's teaching, which I think is the hopeful end to all this book. And I certainly think that's where the reconciliation for Aaron comes in, right? That regardless of, and really as we start to think towards the high holidays and repentance and forgiveness, I think the fact that Aaron is a redeemable character is probably one of the more, not just redeemable, but really kind of ends with a really laudable reputation, is probably one of the more concrete and strong, proofs that we might have certainly for the ability to ask for and receive divine forgiveness. Yeah. Yeah, Fran, please, talk into the mic if you don't mind, so everyone, so they can hear you over
the
Zoom
mic,
too,
okay.
since you're here, since
Now,
you're up here
I
anyway.
was just pondering the idea that what, it says to me is that even though you have brothers and they're as close can be, and Aaron was able to be relied on for very important tasks, way back in Egypt, correct? Right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
But it further strengthens the idea of individuality, and it further strengthens the idea of Moses as a leader, because there is that contrast.
Yeah, and I think, I think what you're bringing up is some of the really difficult part of taking up leadership roles in general, right? It's like, how do you figure out when are the times that you can only trust yourself? How do you figure out who may be the people who you can delegate to, and how do you react when those people fail in what you've set out for them? And so I think there's always a tension between like, well, this is my job, so I'm going to do it, but I can't do it all, so I need to pick someone. And what happens when that other individual can't rise to the occasion? And I think what we're seeing from Moses here more than anything else is really struggling with his own failures and shortcomings, right? And part of that is the failures and shortcomings of the people he loved and trusted to lead up with him, which, it just brings kind of whole different layers of how difficult this is for him. I don't imagine that this was, as I used the word lame duck earlier, like even as someone who is approaching the end of his leadership and might not care one iota what other people think about what he's saying, and he knows he's done, I don't imagine that this was an easy speech to give. I do really think there's a lot of deep emotion in this reflection that is being shared. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I think we will we'll turn back. We are on. Oh, Sharon and Barry are keeping track of it.
We're up to the 6th Aliyah, and we are on verse 6 of chapter 10.
No, we're on verse 1 of
Fifth
chapter 10.
Aliyah.
We're on the 5th
Fifth Aliyah.
Aliyah, so
Pasuk
we
1 of
can't
chapter.
rely on me.
We can rely on the team. That's the goal here. And that is page 1046.
And it's the beginning of chapter 10. Ta'amod shishi, chamishi. Ta'amod bela edela bat berlev fred gemerel chamishit.
Baruch et Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim. Natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Notzein HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Ba'etahi Amar Adonai Elai Pesolecha Shnei Luchot Avanim Karishonim Ve'alei Elai Hahara Vasita Lecha Aron Eitz Va'echtov Al Haluchot Et Hadvarim Asher Hayu Ahaluchot harishonim asher shibarta v'samtem be'aron ve'asaron atzei shitim va'efsol shnei luchot avanim karishonim va'al hahara u'shnei haluchot biadi Vayichtov al haluchot kamichtav harishon Et aseret hadvarim asher diber Adonai aleichem bahar mitoch ha'esh biyom hakahal vayitnem Adonai Elai vayfen ve'ered min hahar Basem et haluchot ba'aron asher asiti vayu sham kasher tzivani Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emes b'chayei olam. Natat b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai notzen haTorah.
Amen.
And number 6. Ha'amod, Rampa, Emmanuel, Shirley, she. And now we are on verse 6 on page 1047. Bnei Israel, Nasu.
Right there.
Baruch et Adonai Hamavorach.
Baruch Adonai Haborach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamavorach Leolam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Uvnei Yisrael Nas'u miveirot b'nei Akan Mosera Sham meit Aaron vayikaver Sham vayichahen Elazar beno tachtav Misham Nas'u hagudgoda umin hagudgoda yot veta Eretz nachle mayim va'et hahi hivdi Adonai et shevet halevi laset et Aaron brit Adonai לעמוד לפני אדוני לשרתו ולברך בשמו עד היום הזה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen. And just one more brief question before we finish up this morning's Torah reading. This came in from Bruce at home. He asks, which I think is a really good question, what do you think is the significance of putting the second set of tablets into an ark? Maybe not something we've thought about before. It just seems kind of natural. The command comes down from Moses, from God to Moses to build an ark to put a second set of tablets into. But what is that about? Why do we need the ark? What's the significance of the ark? Any thoughts?
Like carrying them around, it's easy to carry.
All right, so Barry says it's purely practical. You got to have a way to carry it. You know, you put them in a box, and you can carry a box easier than you can carry stone tablets. I see Barbara Ann and then Raina. Yeah, so there's definitely an element of protection as well once they're in an ark. Raina? Yeah, and so what both Raina and Barbara Ann are saying is they're actually reacting to what we read about Moses doing with the first set of tablets and kind of saying how emotional and rash it was that he threw them on the ground and broke them. And so having a level of protection between these really holy and sacred objects and a human being, even if that human being is Moses or anyone else. Yeah, Fran, all the way from the back, you're gonna have to speak up. That's interesting. So Fran says, and that, we think of even this ark, right? When you have an ark, you need to intentionally open it. And what does that mean to have your process of accessing something need to be really intentional and not just something that's, standing over your head at all times, which maybe you don't notice all the time when you're talking about something like the two tablets. And I'm pointing at what we have over our ark here. The other thing that I'll add, and I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit more once I get to my Dvar Torah this morning, but the tablets were not the only thing in the ark. The ark almost turns into like the people's treasure chest in a way. And so, there are Talmudic traditions that actually the pieces of the broken tablets were in there as well. There's a portion of the manna in a sealed jar that goes in the ark. The staff of Aaron that flowered as part of God's, proof that the Levites were the chosen tribe lives in the ark. So it's almost this, I like the term treasure chest, or, what we all keep at our homes, where we keep our most kind of venerated and sacred objects. And I think it does relate maybe a little bit to what Fran was saying, to what everyone was saying, not just protecting them, but also realizing that sometimes their power comes from not being out and visible all the time, but kind of having them in reserve and really being able to kind of bring them out in a really special way when we want to. Mike, is that a hand? Yeah. Yeah, so Mike talked a little bit just about the enduring mystery of this, right? That the ark is not something that just gets mentioned in Exodus and Deuteronomy, but there's both text and legend of it really kind of going with the people for a really long time, and just the mystery that really imbues in the ark and the legend of the ark. So it actually kind of, in some ways, it makes the objects in the ark even more sacred, right? When you add that layer of mystery and protection. Great. Well, thank you all, and thank you, Bruce, for throwing that in the chat. We continue with the last aliyah, which is chapter 10, verse 9, which is on page 1048.
Ya'amod shvi'i ya'amod Eliyahu b'Tzalel ben Pinchas v'Chana shvi'i.
Okay.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai Hamvarach. Oh, you put it. I got you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Amen. Al kein lo haya leLevi chelek v'nachala imechav Adonai hu nachalato kasher diber Adonai Elohecha lo v'anochi amadti bahar kayamim harishonim 40 yom v'arba'im laila Vayishma Adonai Elai gam v'fa'am hahi lo ava Adonai hishchitecha vayomer Adonai Elai kum lech lemasa lifnei ha'am vayavo vayirshu et haaretz asher nishbati lavotam latet lahem.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam notah b'toheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Please rise for the Chatzi Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah בעלמא דברי חירתי והמליך מלכותי בחייכנו ויומייכנו חיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן יהי שמי רבא מבורך לעולם יומי עולמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתבר בתרומה וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ואמרו amen. You may be seated, and I will turn it over to Sharon for the healing service. Just want to remind the people at home, if there's a name you want to include when we get to that part of the healing service, please put it in the chat, and I will read it out loud.
Little choreography here. Okay, let's start the healing service, please, with the song that we can sing all together. Mi sheberach avotenu mekor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Misha berach avotenu ve'imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Moshe v'Aharon, David u'Shlomo, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, Bilha v'Zilpa, who yivarech v'yirafeh et hacholim b'nei Avraham v'Sarah, b'nei Adam v'Chava. May God, who blessed our ancestors, bless and heal all those in need of it now. And before I read the list, I just want to say, for those of you who didn't come up for Aliyah, we have a new sheet here, and it's interesting to see how, you know, there are different reactions, and some people liked it, and some people were really thrown for the lack of familiarity. And I'm just thinking about how much so many people, at least in this country, are dealing with now with that sort of uncertainty about, do I do it, you know, in terms of masks and COVID and everything. It really does throw you off when there's so much uncertainty, which is the right way to do it now. I got used to something and I can't do it that way anymore, or should I still do it that way? And in some way, I feel like we're all grappling with that and need some healing on that front as well. And these are the names that I have on my list. Shoshana bat Pinchas v'Chana, Meir ben Fega Aaron v'Yitzchak, Aaron Yitzchak, I'm sorry. Dennis McNeely, Jess Kramer, Alexis Watson, May Daub, Bob Jelly, Bruce Mallory, Alan Mann, Barbara Dowd, John O'Brien, Jacques Mansay, Carol Barker, Ken Bosey, Sharon Morell, Chana bat Rivka, Chaim Gedalia ben Chana, Lorraine Daniluk, Denise Stelmack, Jackie McCoy, Madeline Blake, Rachel Barcelona, Kara Smoley, Adam Standard, Dina Bracha bat Miriam, Beverly Stark Ensor, Chana Esther bat Ayala Hadar, Batya bat Neshama V'Meir, Simone bat Camille, Gail Belag, Yehudit Rachel bat Liba, Naftali ben Ella, Esther Basha bat David Mendel. We now invite anybody else here who has a name that you'd like to include, if you would let me know that now, we'll do that. Richie? Barbara Ann? Marty? Jean? Okay, of course, we know that there are names that we didn't mention. There are names that we might not even be aware of, and let's wish for healing close and far and the world over, and for the world itself as well right now. Ba'avur she'anachnu mitpalalim ba'avuram, bishchazeh hakadosh baruch hu yimalei rachamim aleihem, lahachalimam ulrapotam, ulahachazikam ulahachayotam, v'yishlach lehem mehera refuah shlema, refuat hanefesh urefuat haguf, Shabbat himilis oker refuah krova lavo hashtaba agala vizman kariv, v'nomar amen.
And we're back to verse 9 on page 1048. Jean has a question. Presumably. I mean, you can ask them, not me, but... Yes. So Jean is pointing out that Moses is recounting all of the Israelites' missteps, and he is pointing out correctly that all of the people who did all of those things are dead. The whole point of this new generation is that, you know, they are only on the precipice of entering the land of Israel because the last member of that prior sinful generation you know, has suffered their punishment for all of these sins. Yeah, did you want to follow that up, or you just want like a general reflection? I mean, I think the most concise answer I can give is just that idea of, you know, those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. I think you know, whether you think this is the right approach or not, I think Moses or God or the writer or whoever it is wants to make very clear that, you know, just because your parents made these mistakes and are gone does not mean that we should forget about them, and does not mean that you're not liable to fall into the same traps. And I think that's probably the clearest message to me, right? It's not, and in some ways that's what we get from Moses's retrospective angle, right? Yes, these are not the people who did these things, but Moses may not have forgiven, and God may have like gotten to a place of forgiveness with the nation as a whole, where he's willing, where God is willing to, you know, keep the relationship alive and lead them into the land of Israel. It's not clear to me whether Moses has forgiven that generation, especially, you know, with his own impending death and realizing that he won't get into the land of Israel. And I think, you know, part of him handing things over to Joshua is not wanting to see these patterns reemerge. And I think that's probably also where some of the harshness comes from, in like the really, you know, the kind of scare 'em straight sort of tactics of don't go down this road. Yeah. But it is worth noting, right, that all of the harsh tone that Moses is taking on, he's talking to the people's children and grandchildren, not to the people themselves that did all of these things that frustrate the heck out of them. Thanks, Gene. All right, now we're on page 1048, verse 9.
Ya'amod maftir, Ya'amod Eitan Michael, Ben Shmuel Vihudit maftir.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Al Kain lo haya leLevi chelek v'nachala imechav Adonai hu nachalato kasher diber Adonai Elohecha lo va'anochi amadti bahar karyamim harishonim 40 yom v'arba'im laila vayishma Adonai elai gam befam hahi Lo Adonai hishchitecha, vayomer Adonai Elai, kum lech lemasa lifnei ha'am, vayavohu vayirshu et haaretz asher nishbati lavotam latet lahem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Ya'amod haba. Who wants to do it? Somebody who feels strong.
Can you lift?
Yeah.
You've been lifting heavy stuff on the farm all week.
Janet, do you want to come do
I said you've been
Golelet?
lifting heavy stuff on the
No.
farm all week.
Does someone want to come do Golelet?
I will rap for you, Mac, if you lift.
Okay.
Please rise for Hagba. This remember to do it.
I know it's
Bend
heavy.
at the knees.
I got it. Ready?
Whenever you are.
Okay.
V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe l'ifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, Torah, it's in my tikkun. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. You may be seated. Yes, thank you, Matt. Yashikoa. Everyone may be seated. Yeah, and Hagba was something I've been thinking a lot about this week too, because part of we're thinking about Moses and smashing the tablets and how heavy those were or were not, and the Torah's heavy too, and I'm glad we're not smashing it, but I'm glad we were able to get a good lift. This morning's Haftarah continues on the themes of consolation as we move towards Rosh Hashanah in just over a month. And so we will pick up in the book of Isaiah, chapter 49. And I encourage you to follow all the way through because, in my opinion at least, the last verses are really the most striking and beautiful from this Haftarah. So page 1056. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah Moshe avdo v'Yisrael amo v'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek. Vatomer Tzion azavani Adonai, v'Adonai shechechani. התשכח אישה עולה מרחם בן ביתנה, גם אלה תשכחנה, ואנוכי לא אשכחך. הן על כפיים חכותיך, חומותייך נגדי תמיד. מהרו בניך, מהרסייך ומחריבייך ממך יצאו. שאי סביב עינייך וראי, כולם נקבצו באו לך. חיינינו אדוני, כי כולם כעדי תלבשי, ותקשרים ככלה. כי חרבותייך ושומותייך וארץ הריסותייך, כי אתה תצרי מיושב ורחקו מבעלייך. עוד יאמרו באוזנייך בני שיקולייך, צר לי המקום גשלי ואשבה. ואמרת בלבבך, מי יעלה לי את אלה, ואני שכולה וגלמודה, גולה וסורה. ואלה מגידל, הן אני נשארתי לבדי, אלה איפה הם? כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנה אשא אל גויים ידי, ואל עמים ערים נשיא. והביאו בנייך בחוצן, ובנותייך על כתף תנשאנה. והיו מלכים אומנייך, בשרותיהם מניקותייך אפים. ארץ תשתחוו לך, ועפר רגלייך ילחכו, וידעת כי אני אדוני, אשר לא יבושו קרובי. היו כך מגיבור מעל כוח, ואם שבי צדיקים עלית. כי כה אמר אדוני, גם שבי גיבור יוקח, ומעל כוח אריתים עלית. ואת יריבך אנוכי אריב, ואת בנייך אנוכי אושיע. ואכלתי את מונייך את בשרם, וכעסים דממם ישכרון, וידעו כל בשר, כי אני אדוני מושך, וגואלך אוויר יעקב. כה אמר אדוני, איזה ספר כריתות עמכם אשר שילחתיה, או מי מנושי אשר מכרתי אתכם לו. הן בעוונותיכם נמכרתם, ובפשעיכם שולחה עמכם. מדוע באתי ואין איש, קראתי ואין עונה. הקוצר קצרה ידי מפדות, ואם אין בי כוח להציל, הן בגערתי אחריב ים. אשים נהרות מדבר, תיבש תגתם מעין מים, ותמות בצמא. אבי שמיים כדרות, ושק אשים כסותם. אדוני אלוהים נתן לי לשון לימודים, לדעת לעוט את יעף דבר. יאיר בבוקר בבוקר, יאיר לי אוזן לשמוע כלימודים. אדוני אלוהים פתח לי אוזן, ואנוכי לא מריתי, אחור לא נסוגותי. גבי נתתי למכים, ולחיי למורטים. פניי לא הסתרתי מכלימות ורוק, ואדוני אלוהים יעזור לי. על כן לא נכלמתי, על כן שמתי פניי כחלמיש, ואדע כי לא אבוש. קרוב מצדיקי, מי יריב איתי נעמדה יחד, מבעל משפטי ייגש אליי. הן אדוני אלוהים יעזור לי, מי הוא ירשיעני. הן כולם כבגד יבלו אשיוכלם. מי בכם ירא אדוני, שמע בקול עבדו אשר הלך חשיכים ואינו גלו יפתח בשם אדוני וישען באלוהיו הן כולכם קודחי אש מעזרי זיקות לכו באור אשכם ובזיקות ביארתם מידי הייתה זאת לכם למצבה תשכבון שימו אלי רודפי צדק מבקשי אדוני הביטו אל צור חוצבתם ואל מקבת בור נוכרתם הביטו אל אברהם אביכם ואל שרה תחוללכם כי אחד קראתיו ואברכהו וערבהו כי ניחם אדוני ציון ניחם כל חרבותיה וישם מדברה כעדן וערבתה כגן אדוני ששון ושמחה ימצא בה תודה וכל זמרה ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם צור כל עמים צדיק בכל הדורות האל הנאמן האומר ועושה המדבר ומקיים שכל דבריו אמת וצדק נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ונאמנים דבריך בדבר אחד מדבריך חור לא ישוב ריקם כי על מלך נאמן רחמן אתה ברוך אתה אדוני האל הנאמן בכל דבריו רחם על ציון כי בית חיינו ועלובת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו ברוך אתה אדוני משמח ציון בבניה שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו בעליון אבי עבדך ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו על כיסו לא ישב זר ולא ינחלו עד אחרים את כבודו כי בשם קדשך נשבעת לו שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מגן דוד על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת amen. Page 153 we rise to return the Torah to the ark. Barry makes his sixth trip up to the Bima today.
Hallelujah, Shem Adonai, ki nishke shemo levado.
Kolo haaretz v'shamayim vayarem keren li'amo tila lechol chasidav livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Please move Havu Adonai b'nei Elim Havu Adonai Havod vos Havu Adonai kevod shemo Hishtachavu Adonai behadrat kodesh Kol Adonai ba'koach, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover arazim, Vaishaber Adonai et arzei halvanon. Yardem kemo egel, lebmanos kemo Kol Adonai continue at the bottom of 154. Chaim hi v'machazikim ba v'tomcheha meushar deracheha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu kekedem Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu kekedem Amen. You may be seated. Thank you, Barry. So, in case I haven't made this abundantly clear already this morning, what I've been thinking about most this week is just what was going on for Moses as he came down off of Mount Sinai with the original 2 tablets in his hands, while he witnessed the people led by his own brother Aaron in their celebration of the golden calf. I think that we can all relate to the fact that this would have been an incredibly difficult moment for him. The emotions that he must have churned through, surprise, shock, disappointment, frustration, anger, I think that's only a partial list, none of which are much fun to experience on their own, certainly not when they're all happening together in really quick succession. Perhaps then it's no surprise to see that Moses' reaction is really, I think, incredibly and universally human. Chapter 9, verse 17 states that after seeing the people carousing in front of the golden calf, Moses gripped the 2 tablets and flung them away with both my hands, smashing them before your eyes. In this moment of crisis and intense emotion, what does Moses do? He throws something. He breaks something. The same reaction we might expect from a toddler or a teenager or even an upset loved one. The Hebrew word used in this verse is ashlichem, with a root that means to throw, to fling, or to cast. And that root may sound familiar to many of you. It's the same as the root for the Hebrew word tashlich, the ritual we partake in on Rosh Hashanah afternoon, where we take some crumbs of bread and symbolically cast our sins into a body of water, shedding ourselves of them. Tashlich, of course, is a ritual of letting go. And there are some rabbinic opinions that hold that Moses did not, in fact, fling the tablets, rather, he just let them go. One midrashic interpretation holds that as the golden calf came into Moses' view, the letters started to fly off of the tablets. Once the stones were again blank, Moses saw no reason to carry them any farther, and he just dropped them in sight of the people. A slightly more literal-minded midrash says that upon seeing the golden calf, Moses' strength simply ran out. He didn't throw the tablets, but he couldn't possibly hold them any longer, and he dropped them. In fact, this midrash goes out of its way to clarify that if Moses did indeed throw them, all the strength that he could muster was just to throw them right beyond his feet. As we all know that Moses was more of an open-toed sandal guy than a steel-toed boot type, and he didn't want any broken toes. Until last week, this explanation always made sense to me on both a really simple and straightforward and also a slightly deeper and spiritual level. At the time of Revelation, Moses was approximately 80 years old, and we've all seen the depictions of those tablets being hauled down by Charlton Heston. They look heavy. So, of course, Moses couldn't bear that all on his own. Only with divine strength and assistance could Moses have made it down a mountain while carrying these large stone tablets. Once that divine strength deserted him, or even that human strength deserted him, he had to watch out for his toes. I want to call your attention, however, to a note on page 1009 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash. An explanation, and I'll read it, you don't all have to go opening up, but it's an explanation brought by the editors of the Chumash to shed some light about what the tablets may have actually looked like. And this is a comment on last week's Parsha, where we're talking about 2 tablets of stone. The editors write, "Stone normally was only used for texts that were intended to be permanent, such as royal and ceremonial inscriptions, boundary inscriptions, and treaties. An Aramaic decree of the 7th century BCE was written on a stone tablet about 11 inches square. It is inscribed on one side with 32 words covering 8 lines. 2 such tablets, inscribed on both sides, 15 or 16 inches square, could have held the 10 Commandments' 189 words. A rectangular shape is consistent with Jewish tradition and early Christian art. The familiar image of tablets with curved tops was introduced in Christian art around the 11th century Common Era." Who knows what these stones actually looked like? And if we had an antiquities scholar to really flesh out this comment from the Eitz Chaim, I would love to hear from them right now. But still, I have a feeling that none of us were thinking that the famous tablets, the first set carved by God, were essentially the size of small paving stones. It changes our perspective quite a bit. And for me at least, it brings back to the forefront the physicality of the experiences of Sinai and the golden calf. In reading Moses' recount of those events this morning, we get a better idea of what the memorable parts of these larger-than-life events were for him. And in fact, it doesn't seem that it's so much the epic experience of talking to God that stands out for Moses. It's the physical elements that inscribe themselves on his memory. The stone, the fire, the smoke, the not eating and drinking, which he mentions multiple times. These are what his narrative turns to over and over again. The interplay of the physical and the spiritual, the bridging of the tangible and the intangible, is where the conflict between the events of the revelation at Sinai and the sin of the golden calf has always existed. The people needed a physical manifestation of God at the very moment when the Word of God and the Spirit of God was upon them. But if we imagine tablets that were less than the size of this piece of paper, the obvious lesson would be that maybe the tablets themselves didn't matter all that much, that the words that were inscribed on the tablets and hearing those words was what mattered. But again, at the end of the day, we generally don't imagine them being quite this tiny. The 16 square inches, just for context, the 16 square inches that is mentioned in that comment, that's, a 4x4 piece of paper. It's pretty small. I think, of course, of the entrance to this very building that we're in. The looming 2-story tall tablets looking out over Washington Street. And they don't even have any words on them. Seeing them Recognizing the physical artifact has always mattered. Rabbi Isaac Abarvanel, a 15th century Portuguese Torah scholar and commentator, doesn't in fact think that Moses' strength failed him. Abarvanel wonders why Moses bothered bringing down the tablets at all, once God told him the distressing news of Israel's behavior. He writes that Moses did not break the tablets on the mountain itself when he was first apprised of the sin of the calf, but intentionally broke them in the camp. And Abarvanel writes, "For had Israel not seen the tablets intact, the awesome work of Adonai, they would not have been moved by the fragments, since the soul is more impressed by what it sees than by what it hears. He therefore brought them down from the mountain to show them to the people, and then break them before their very eyes." The shattering of the original tablets may have happened in an instant, but that moment of impact lasted. As opposed to the golden calf, which Moses ground to dust and threw into the water of the mountain to dissipate, the Talmud teaches us that these shards of stone of the first tablets were not discarded or lost. They too became an important artifact, joining the second whole set of tablets in the ark and accompanying the Israelites on their journeys and in the temple. Rabbi Naomi Kalish writes that this teaches us the importance of carrying the broken and the whole together. Personal and spiritual growth isn't accomplished through erasing our past. Rather, it's accomplished by integrating our past. We learn from our mistakes. We don't pretend they never happened. And perhaps that's why these tablets have become such an enduring symbol. They're not just the word of God from Sinai or the 10 most important laws of the Torah. The tablets themselves are a symbol of our own hope for a second chance, a single reminder of all the highs and lows of human experience, and it makes an incredibly powerful artifact. Whether it's 2 stories tall or carved into heavy, heavy stone, or whether it's something we carry with us in our pockets each and every day. And we'll continue on towards the end of services. Almost there. Page 184 for the full Kaddish. You can stand or sit as you please. Yitkadal v'kadash me rabbah, ve'alma divrach yirtei v'amlich malchutei, b'chaychon ve'bachon v'chay v'chol beit Yisrael, b'agalav izman kariv v'meru, amen. Yehi shmei rabbah mevorach, le'olam me'ol maya, Yitbarach, v'shtabach, v'yitbar v'yishomam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shmei d'kudisha, brichu, le'elam mikol birchatav v'shiratav, shuchatav v'nechamatav, damiran be'alma v'meru, amen. Yehi shalom rab min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al Yisrael v'meru, amen. Oseh shalom imromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'meru, amen. And I'm sorry, I gave the wrong page. That should have been 181. You may be seated on 182 as we continue with Ein Keloheinu. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadonenu, Michemalkeinu, Michemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shektiru Avoteinu, Lefanecha Ketoret Hasamim. 183, please rise for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon hakol, latei kedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, umishtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu noteh shamayim v'yosed haaretz umoshav yikaro b'shamayim imal ushchinatu zo v'gavhei meromim hu Eloheinu einod Emet Malkeinu Efesulato Kakatuv Bitorato Viadatayom Mehashivota Elevavecha Ki Adonai Hua Elohim Bashamayim Imal Vial Haaretz Mitachat Einod Einod. And at the bottom of the page, Kakatuv b'toratecha, Adonai imloch leolam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad Ushemo Echad. And now we turn to page 184 for the Mourner's Kaddish. This week, Congregation Havas Achim marks the Yahrzeit of David Harnch, Ruth Block Wilson, Max Denson, and Rosalind Roth. May their memories be a blessing. Please join me in the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach yurtei v'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam olmei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei, Vitadar, Vitale, Vitalal, Shemei de Kudesha, Vrichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom mimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. You may be seated. One more time, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good to see those of you in front of me. Good to see people tuning in from all over on Zoom. And thank you and Yasher Koach to everyone who helped make services run this morning. And of course, special thank you to Mac and Leah and Bonnie, all of whom are working together on the computer this morning with the hope that next Shabbos, Mac can have a Shabbos off and sleep in a little bit. So hopefully our new apprentices are all trained up. So thank all three of you for letting people tune in from wherever they find themselves. And of course, thank you to Janet for keeping an eye on the front door as well. There are a bunch of things going on over the next week plus. First and foremost, even though this is not an official CAA event, this afternoon, for those of you local to the Newburyport area, is the Favorite Poem Project, which will take place at 3 o'clock, I think behind the Custom House Maritime Museum. That is, of course, organized by CAA member Debbie Zabo. I will be making an appearance this afternoon and reading a poem, even if there is some disappointment that it won't be a Hebrew poem, it will be a meaningful poem, and next year we'll work on a Hebrew poem. So that's at 3. And of course, there are some CAA-related Yankee homecoming events. We are still collecting school supplies. Those of you who haven't seen the awesome box and sign out front, that Sue Mandel made. It's worth going and picking up a bunch of school supplies just for the opportunity to put them in the box. That'll be outside for another hour today, and then again next Shabbos and next Sunday at 2:30 p.m. when we gather back here after the Yankee Homecoming Parade for our ice cream social. So both of those events, the parade and the ice cream social, if you want to come, there's a sign up online that will be in the e-blast. Wednesday evening, for those of you who are members, we are, God willing, going to approve the bylaws. So please log on to Zoom and take part in that process if you're available. That's at 7 on Wednesday, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm getting the nod. So that will be at 7 o'clock on Wednesday. Any other announcements or things we should all be aware of? Barbara Ann? Great, thank you. Yeah, so also working towards celebrating the congregation's 125th anniversary, Barbara Ann has put a box downstairs for any memorabilia that she's helping Debbie and Sue Latham collect. So if you have anything you'd like to contribute, please put it in that box downstairs. And as she said, put your name on the back if it is something you want back. The last thing I'll say before we finish up, I do just want to thank Sharon for her words that she shared during the healing service. I didn't quite know where you were going when you started talking about the Aliyah card, but as usual, I had my faith in you that you were going to know what you were talking about. It is a time of, unfortunately, continuing tremendous uncertainty. You know, we're all doing our best. I also know that, like, I was telling my dad last night, I wish we would have just celebrated the high holidays 2 weeks ago because it would have been a lot easier. And, you know, we're going to do our best as a community and as the leadership of the community to craft. We know how to do it no matter what, right? We know how to do it in person. We know how to do it over Zoom. I'm learning how to do it hybrid. We're going to do our best to make it a meaningful experience for everyone. We do value input. We especially value input that is given constructively and patiently and lovingly. So know that you have our ears and that we, you know, the two most important things to us in this order are everyone's health and safety, and then the experience, the ritual experience and the communal experience that CAA provides. And so we really are doing our best for that. And you know, I know the tremendous amount of uncertainty that is going into, once again, unfortunately, kind of every time we leave the house, and we're all figuring this out together. So being supportive of one another and being supportive of the institutions that are meaningful to you continues to be really important. So thank you for putting great words to that earlier, Sharon. We'll turn to page 395 and rise for Hatikva, followed by Kiddush. Kol od ba'leva penima nefesh Yehudi homia ufate mizrachadima Tzion Sophia Olav Tikvateinu Hatikva b'shot alpayim Li'otam chofshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Li'otam chofshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat La'asot et HaShabbat le'dorotam berit olam Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat La'asot et HaShabbat le'dorotam berit olam Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, la'asot et HaShabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ki shesh yamim asa Adonai, et hashamayim v'et haaretz ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברכן את יום השבת ויקדשהו סברי, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Good to see you all. Thank you all for tuning in, for coming. Enjoy the beautiful Saturday, and maybe see you to read a poem later. Yes. Thanks.
Thinking, we need to talk more. What are we doing?
I mean, we are talking, like, the conversations are happening. I am more or less, I feel like I'm treading water a little bit to see what the state and the city and the CDC does. I don't see a ton of value anymore in being the strictest voice in the room, because I don't think if no one else is wearing a mask or doing anything else, I don't think there's any value in saying, especially on a Saturday